Welcome to the Playing Books podcast. So, if you think about walking through the downtown core of like any major metropolis, whether it's New York or Dubai or Tokyo, our eyes are just inevitably, almost magnetically drawn upward.
Oh, absolutely. Always looking up.
Right. You stand on the pavement and you crane your neck to take in the sheer scale of the architecture. We're marveling at the glass facades, catching the morning light, the steel superstructures, the spires piercing the clouds.
Yeah, we applaud the height.
Exactly. We celebrate the aesthetic beauty and the engineering prowess that, frankly, allows human beings to live and work 100 stories in the air. But what we almost never do is look down at the dirty sidewalk.
Nobody looks at the concrete.
Right. We don't stare at the concrete beneath our feet and applaud the foundation. We aren't standing there thinking about the massive, invisible concrete pylons driven like 50 or 100 feet deep into the bedrock.
Which is funny because that's the most important part.
It really is. Anyone with even a basic understanding of engineering knows that if that invisible foundation isn't there, or if there's even like a microscopic flaw in its structural integrity, that entire magnificent skyscraper will inevitably collapse under its own staggering weight.
It's just gravity. It has to.
Yeah. The higher a building goes, the deeper and more solid its foundation must be.
Okay.
So today we are exploring a human virtue that functions exactly like that subterranean concrete. It's entirely invisible to the casual observer.
Completely buried.
Completely buried beneath the surface of our public lives. And frankly, it's largely ignored by a culture that is just obsessed with height and visibility. But it is the absolute non-negotiable prerequisite for any life that aspires to reach the sky without eventually crumbling into ruin.
I mean, that is just the perfect architectural metaphor for what we're tackling in this episode. It really is.
Okay, let's unpack this. We are spending our time today looking at the profound and honestly life-altering concepts found in this book, Humility, True Greatness by C.J. Mahaney.
Yes, and our entire purpose in this podcast is to examine how this often overlooked and frankly frequently mocked virtue of humility is actually the ultimate shortcut to grace.
It's totally misunderstood, too.
Oh, massively misunderstood. But it's the foundational bedrock of a transformed life. And ironically, it's the only legitimate pathway to true greatness.
So I want you, the listener, to actively participate in this conversation right from the start. Just take a brief mental inventory of what you are building with your life right now.
That's a great exercise.
Right, because it might be a career ladder you're aggressively climbing. Or maybe you're building a family, pouring your energy into raising children or cultivating a marriage, or, maybe a small business.
Or an artistic portfolio even.
Yeah, whatever it is. Now, I want you to fast forward through the decades to the end of it all. What will people actually say about your legacy when the building is finished?
The real legacy.
Exactly. Will they talk about your accolades, your bank account, your square footage? Or will they look at the sum total of your life, how you interacted with people, and say, they had humility?
It's a genuinely jarring question to ask ourselves.
It really is, because humility is almost never the metric we use to measure a successful life.
No, it's jarring because our default human operating system is wired for self-promotion, not, self-effacement.
Oh, 100%.
And that is precisely why we're going to walk through this entire book. We're going to dissect the personal stories, the historical quotes he brings to the table, and most importantly, the really practical lessons he draws from them.
Right, from the daily perils of our own pride to the specific practices of a humble life. So let's start with the surprising, almost counterintuitive appeal of humility.
Yeah, especially in environments where you'd absolutely assume it has no place.
Right. Like the cutthroat corporate world. You think about Wall Street in the 1980s, the era of the celebrity CEO, the corporate raiders.
The loudest voice in the room crushing the competition.
Exactly. It seems like an environment that rewards pure, unadulterated ego. But then the author points us toward Jim Collins's massive business bestseller, Good to Great, which completely shatters that assumption.
It really does, because Collins and his team engaged in this massive 5-year analytical study. They weren't looking at theology or philosophy.
Right, they were just looking at hard data.
Exactly, hard financial data. They wanted to identify companies that had made the leap from merely good to truly great, meaning like they generated cumulative stock returns that beat the general market by at least 3 times over 15 years.
Which is a huge margin.
Oh, massive. So they were looking for common denominators among the leaders who engineered these turnarounds, and they fully expected to find these larger-than-life, charismatic, ego-driven saviors.
The Lee Iacocca types.
Right, the guys demanding the spotlight. But the data didn't support that at all. Instead, they found what Collins called level 5 leaders. Yeah. And these leaders had this intense, ferocious professional will and drive. But the defining paradox was that they were personally modest. They were entirely self-effacing.
Okay, but how does that actually play out in a corporate environment? Like, how does a CEO exercise ferocious professional will while remaining self-effacing?
Well, it manifests in how they handle success and failure. Collins noted that when things went incredibly well, these level 5 leaders would literally point out the window.
Point out the window.
Yeah. They'd attribute the success to their team, to their predecessors, or, honestly, just to dumb luck. They systematically refused to take the credit.
Wow.
But when things went poorly, they did the exact opposite. They looked in the mirror and took full responsibility.
That is so rare.
It is. They never wanted to be these untouchable corporate icons. They prioritized the long-term health of the institution over their own personal legacy.
So if Collins found that level 5 leaders are actually modest, it forces us to completely rethink how we're building our own careers. I mean, that's a secular business book proving that humility works on a purely pragmatic level.
Yeah, it builds trust and loyalty.
This book doesn't stop at pragmatism. Pragmatism is just the entry point. He transitions us to the biblical definition of humility, which operates on an entirely different plane.
An infinitely higher plane, yeah.
Right. And he anchors it in the Old Testament, specifically Isaiah chapter 66, verse 2, where God says, "This is the one to whom I will look, he who is humble and contrite in spirit and trembles at my word."
The phrasing there is incredibly specific because God is omniscient, right? By definition, he spiritually sees everything in the universe simultaneously.
Nothing escapes his notice.
Exactly. So when Isaiah says God looks at the humble, it's not about mere observation. It's a magnetic, deliberate attraction. God is drawn to a humble heart like a magnet to iron.
I love that image.
Yeah, and based on this, the author defines humility with a very precise 2-part formula. Honestly assessing ourselves in light of God's holiness and our sinfulness.
It's a twin reality. You have to hold both parts of that equation together to maintain actual humility.
Precisely. If you isolate either half, you distort reality. If you only look at God's absolute holiness without understanding his grace, you fall into crushing despair.
You just see an unbridgeable chasm.
Right. But on the flip side, if you only look at your own flaws without referencing God at all, you just get trapped in the cycle of self-obsession or self-pity.
You're just staring at your own navel.
Exactly. But holding both realities together, the infinite holiness of the Creator and the profound brokenness of the creature, that honest assessment is the birthplace of biblical humility.
So if humility is holding that twin reality together, then pride is simply the act of letting go of one half of it. It's deliberately forgetting God's holiness so we can artificially elevate ourselves.
Yeah.
And I have to say, the way the author illustrates the sheer everyday absurdity of pride in this book is so universally relatable.
Oh, the car story.
The car story. It's hilarious. So he tells this story about his own complete and utter mechanical ineptitude. He fully admits he knows nothing about cars.
Nothing at all.
But one day, his teenage daughter tells him her car is making a terrifying noise. He goes outside, turns the key, hears this violent metallic shrieking sound, and immediately shuts it off.
Yeah, the logical thing.
Right. The humble thing to do would be to walk back inside and call a mechanic.
But he doesn't do that. Because of pride, he pops the hood.
He pops the hood. He literally leans over the engine block and stares intently at the machinery, purely because he knows his neighbors might be looking out their windows.
Oh, it's so funny.
He desperately wants to project the aura of a capable patriarch, diagnosing a mechanical failure, even though the only thing he knows how to find is the windshield wiper fluid.
He's just staring at it, hoping his intense masculine gaze will magically fuse the broken belts back together.
It's hilarious because we've all done something exactly like that.
Oh, for sure. And he follows it up with an even more vulnerable story about trying to put air in his tire at a gas station.
Oh, this one is painful.
It really is. He pulls up to the air pump, tries to attach the hose to the valve stem, and instead of filling it, he fumbles. It makes this terrifying PHHHT sound as air violently escapes.
And the machine starts dinging.
Yes. Ding, ding. He completely panics. He's utterly convinced the tire's going to explode and kill him right there on the concrete.
And his internal monologue is amazing here.
He literally starts thinking about his own funeral, imagining people weeping but secretly whispering, what an idiot, he couldn't even fill a tire.
Which is such a prideful thought in itself.
Exactly. So he ends up letting more air out than he put in, gives up, and drives his car all the way home on a flat tire, risking ruining the rim just to escape the scene of his incompetence.
Just to save face. And when he finally asks a close friend for help later, his friend assesses the situation and literally calls him a moron.
Yep. It just perfectly highlights how pride completely overrides human logic.
Yeah.
We will literally risk destroying our own property or public humiliation just to preserve the fragile illusion that we are entirely self-sufficient.
We hate asking for help because it requires an admission of limitation.
Right. But the author uses these comedic examples to reveal the very dark theological underbelly of what pride actually is.
Yeah, it's not just a quirky flaw.
No, it's the radioactive core of all human sin. He traces it all the way back to the very first sin in the cosmos. Satan's rebellion in Isaiah 14, where Lucifer says, I will ascend to heaven. Above the stars of God, I will set my throne.
And leaning on historical theologians, he defines pride as contending for supremacy with God. It's cosmic theft.
Cosmic theft. We are attempting to steal the glory and self-sufficiency that solely belongs to the Creator. A proud person is attempting a coup in the throne room of their own heart.
And this is why Scripture emphatically states that God actively opposes the proud. Not just dislikes opposes. James 4.6 says, God opposes the proud, but gives grace to the humble.
It's an active, present tense, divine resistance.
Okay, but I have to push back here for a second.
Yeah.
If God is the infinite, entirely self-sufficient creator of the universe, holding galaxies together, why does a human's tiny burst of arrogance even register on his radar?
That's the million-dollar question.
Right. Why does he care so much if we act a little arrogant? Is he insecure? Does he have a fragile ego that needs constant validation from us?
That is the natural place our modern minds jump to, but the answer requires a complete paradigm shift.
Yeah.
God's opposition to our pride is absolutely not born out of insecurity.
Okay.
God is perfectly complete. He doesn't need us to validate his existence. His active opposition to our pride is actually an act of profound, holy mercy.
Mercy. How is opposing us a form of mercy?
Because God is the architect of reality, and he knows that pride is fundamentally self-destructive. Pride isolates us. It makes us insufferable. It ruins our relationships because it prevents us from ever apologizing.
That makes a lot of sense.
Right. And most dangerously, it separates us from God. If God allowed us to continue in our pride unopposed, we would consume ourselves, would build our own little isolated hells of self-worship.
Wow.
So when God crushes our pride, he's executing a rescue mission. He wars against our pride out of love to protect us from the viper that destroys the soul.
He opposes us to protect us from ourselves, which makes total sense when you look at how deeply unhappy, chronically arrogant people usually are.
Exactly.
And this theological framework takes us directly into the second major theme of this book, the great reversal. If pride is contending for supremacy with God, how do we redefine what it actually means to be great?
Because we naturally desire greatness.
We do. To explain this, the author takes us straight into the Gospel of Mark, chapters 9 and 10.
Yeah.
And frankly, the behavior of Jesus' closest disciples here is excruciatingly embarrassing.
It really is. In Mark 9, they're walking along a dusty road with Jesus, and they are literally arguing, bickering like children about who among them is the greatest.
Right in front of him.
Well, behind his back, they thought. But when they arrive at a house, Jesus turns and asks, "What were you discussing on the way?" And the text says they kept silent. They just fall awkwardly silent out of deep shame.
Because they realize how petty they sound. But then, instead of learning their lesson, it gets worse in chapter 10. James and John pull Jesus aside and make this incredibly brazen request.
A blank check request.
Yeah, they say, "Teacher, we want you to do for us whatever we ask." And Jesus asks what they want, and they say, "Grant us to sit, one at your right hand and one at your left, in your glory."
You have to understand their political expectations here. They assumed Jesus was going to initiate a violent political revolution to establish an earthly kingdom.
They're asking for Prime Minister and Secretary of Defense?
Exactly. They want personal exaltation, fame, and dominance.
And when the other 10 disciples hear about this secret meeting, they are indignant. But, and this is key, they aren't indignant because James and John misunderstood the spiritual mission.
No, they're mad because James and John tried to cut in line.
Yes. The other 10 wanted those corner offices for themselves. Their indignation reveals their own hidden pride. They were all playing the same power game.
And this specific moment of petty infighting is where Jesus executes a radical redefinition of greatness. He gathers them and points out the Roman method of leadership, domination, coercion, subjugation.
Proving your greatness by how many people you can force to serve you.
Right, and then Jesus drops the hammer. He says, "But it shall not be so among you. But whoever would be great among you must be your servant, and whoever would be first among you must be slave of all."
The ultimate inversion of the human pyramid. True greatness is measured by the number of people you are willing to serve.
But the author is very careful to point out that Jesus doesn't just stop at giving a brilliant new moral philosophy. An ethical code isn't enough to fix the heart.
Right.
Jesus finishes by saying, "For even the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many."
And this is the crux of the entire argument in this book. Jesus' example of servanthood was beautiful, but an example alone wasn't enough to cure the terminal disease of our pride. We don't just need a role model, we need a savior. He had to give his life as a ransom.
And we use the word ransom today and think of a Hollywood thriller, kidnappers, unmarked bills.
Right, a briefcase of cash. But to a first-century listener, the Greek word lutron carried a very specific, heavy cultural weight.
Absolutely. It was the exact calculated price paid to buy the freedom of a slave in the market, or to liberate a prisoner of war, or commute a death sentence.
It was associated with the lowest, most desperate tiers of society.
So when Jesus used this word, he was telling his disciples, you are not just misguided men who need a better moral compass. You are captives. You're held hostage by your own blinding pride.
A divine rescue operation is required.
Yes. And the only acceptable currency to pay that ransom is my own blood.
The psychological shift to accept that you're a prisoner in need of rescue rather than a hero in need of an opportunity is massive, but it actually worked. Look at James and John later in their lives.
Total transformation.
In Mark 10, they're arrogant glory seekers. But in the book of Acts, James becomes the very first apostle to be violently martyred, executed by the sword. He doesn't get a throne, he gets a blade.
And John is exiled to the desolate island of Patmos, writing about laying down one's life for others. They were ransomed from their pride, and it completely rewired their desires.
Okay, but we all have an inner James and John living quietly inside our hearts. We secretly want the corner office. We want the applause. How do we reconcile our natural ambition with this radical call to be a slave to all? Do we just annihilate our ambition?
That's the subtle genius of Jesus' teaching here. Notice, he doesn't actually crush their ambition. He doesn't say it's evil to want to be great.
He doesn't.
No. He says, whoever would be great. He acknowledges the desire. He takes that ambition, and instead of extinguishing it, he purifies it. He redirects it.
I see.
He's essentially saying, if you want to be great, go for it. But here is the actual path you must serve.
Yeah.
He redirects that powerful energy away from self-glorification and points it squarely toward God glorification through serving others.
Okay, so how do we transition from the high theology of the ransom to the messy, practical reality of a Tuesday morning? Because this book makes it clear that just understanding the theology doesn't cure your pride.
No, you don't just read a chapter and go, excellent, I am now perfectly humble.
Right. It requires purposeful, aggressive, daily application. And the author offers these incredibly practical morning and evening strategies.
The daily pursuit. He argues that how we begin our morning structurally sets the trajectory for the entire day.
Before we even look at our phones.
Exactly. Before the emails, the very first thing we must do is intentionally reflect on the cross. He shares this poignant anecdote about Carl F.H. Henry, the eminent theologian.
Oh, this is so good.
Don Carson asked Carl Henry how he managed to remain so genuinely humble despite his immense success. And Carl Henry replied with a single question. How can anyone be arrogant when he stands beside the cross?
It's the ultimate great equalizer. You cannot puff out your chest when you are mentally standing at the foot of an execution stake. It completely deflates the ego.
It does. And to reinforce this, the author quotes Martin Lloyd-Jones, who said something that absolutely stopped me in my tracks.
What was it?
He said, most of your unhappiness in life is due to the fact that you are listening to yourself instead of talking to yourself.
Wow. Listening to yourself instead of talking to yourself.
Think about the mechanics of waking up. If you just passively lie there and listen to your internal monologue, what do you hear? You hear anxiety, grievances from yesterday, the subtle whisper of pride telling you what you have to accomplish.
Because, as the author observes, sin doesn't wake up tired.
Exactly. Your body might be exhausted, but your pride hasn't been sleeping. It's fully energized and ready to dominate your mindset.
Sin doesn't wake up tired. You have to go on the offensive immediately.
Instead of passively listening to the negative default settings, you have to actively talk to yourself. Preach the truth of the gospel to your own soul before your feet hit the floor.
And part of that offensive strategy is seizing the daily commute. The author tells the story of William Wilberforce, the British parliamentarian who led the charge to abolish the slave trade.
He had a 1-mile walk to Parliament every day.
Right. And instead of letting his mind wander or dwelling on the vicious political attacks against him, he used that specific walk to memorize and recite the entirety of Psalm 119. He seized his commute.
Contrast that with how we handle our commutes. Sitting in gridlock traffic, blood pressure rising, listening to political talk radio designed to keep us in a state of perpetual outrage.
We're just zoning out. He's challenging us to redeem that dead time. Use it to express gratitude or cast your anxieties on God. And it's worth noting here that anxiety is often just a masked form of pride.
I know that sounds counterintuitive, right? We think of anxious people as lacking confidence.
Exactly. How is anxiety pride?
Well, think about the root mechanism. Anxiety is often the result of us trying to carry the weight of the world on our own shoulders. It's the assumption that we must possess the power to control all future outcomes.
Oh, I see.
When we fret obsessively, we're acting as if we are the sovereign rulers of our universe, and the pressure crushes us because we aren't equipped for the job. Humility says, I am not omniscient. I cannot control the future.
That is incredibly liberating. So we have the morning routine and seizing the commute. But the evening routine, here's where it gets really interesting. He introduces the concept of avoiding cosmic plagiarism.
Such a fantastic phrase.
Right. Plagiarism is taking someone else's hard work and accepting the applause. Applied spiritually, when we get to the end of the day, we look back at our successes, a great presentation, a good parenting moment, and we sit back and say, I did that. I'm capable.
And he says when we do that, we are stealing the credit that rightfully belongs to the sustaining grace of God.
It's like a paintbrush demanding a solo exhibition at a museum.
Yes.
Imagine a paintbrush saying, look at the incredible textures I created. The brush was useful, sure, but it was merely an instrument in the hand of the master artist. The artist gets the glory.
We must end our day by deliberately transferring all the glory for our successes back to God.
And right after that, we engage in the most vulnerable act of the day, sleep. He goes into the theology of sleep, credited to Mark Dever.
We spend a third of our lives unconscious in a bed, and we rarely think about its spiritual significance.
We just think of it as a biological annoyance.
Right. But the author explains that sleep is a daily, physical reminder of our human frailty. God could have designed us to run 24/7 without resting, but he didn't. He deliberately designed us with a severe limitation.
We're forced to shut down.
Exactly. It forces us to confront the reality that we are not the creator. Psalm 121 contrasts this by stating that God is the only one who never slumbers or sleeps.
Sleep is essentially a physical parable of faith. Every night, you lie down, put your full weight on a mattress, and relinquish all control. You're trusting that while you are weak and unaware, someone else, God, is sustaining your heartbeat.
It strips away the arrogant illusion that the world needs you to stay awake to keep it turning.
So those are the daily routines. But in the next section, the author transitions to advanced practices. These are the longer-term habits. And his first recommendation is really heavy. Study God's incommunicable attributes.
Yes, the characteristics that belong exclusively to God and aren't shared with humanity at all.
Like omnipresence.
Exactly. God exists everywhere simultaneously. We are bound by space and time. God is infinite. He is perfectly self-existent, relying on nothing outside of himself.
When you study that, the sheer scale of the gap between you and the Creator becomes glaringly obvious. It fundamentally shrinks your ego.
You cannot hold a comprehensive view of God's infinite majesty and an inflated view of yourself at the same time.
He also recommends studying the doctrines of grace, realizing your salvation is entirely unmerited favor. But then, right after these heavy theological concepts, he throws a complete curveball.
The practical tips.
2 wildly practical, almost comedic tips for staying humble. His first one, play golf.
It's brilliant. Golf is universally, reliably humiliating.
It really is. You could be a billionaire CEO, but the golf ball does not care about your net worth. The mechanics are so unforgiving that even professional athletes hit terrible shots into the woods.
It's perfectly designed to break your ego and force you to accept failure gracefully.
And his second tip is to simply learn to laugh at yourself heartily. If you can't laugh at your own clumsiness, you're taking yourself way too seriously. You're guarding your dignity too closely.
A truly humble person doesn't feel the constant need to protect their ego. They trip over a rug, they laugh, they don't feel diminished.
And this internal freedom moves us into a critical outward practice, identifying evidences of grace in other people. By human nature, we are cognitively wired to immediately spot the flaws in everyone around us.
Hypercritical by default. To counter this, he brings up Paul's first letter to the Corinthians.
Now, if anyone deserved criticism, it was a Corinthian church. They were an absolute disaster. Internal divisions, public lawsuits, gross immorality.
A total mess. And yet, how does Paul open his letter? Before addressing the chaos, he writes, I give thanks to my God always for you because of the grace of God that was given you in Christ Jesus.
He intentionally trains his eyes to look past the mess and see the evidence of God's grace first. He leads with profound gratitude.
Contrast that with how we usually operate. He points to Lucy from the Peanuts cartoon. There's a strip where she's scowling at Linus and she says, it's very strange. It happens just by looking at you. I can feel a criticism coming on.
Or Mr. Darcy from Pride and Prejudice, who never looks at a woman but to see a blemish. I mean, we all have a little bit of Lucy and Darcy in us. We walk into a meeting and our eyes act like heat-seeking missiles for whatever's annoying.
It requires immense humility to short-circuit that reflex. You have to force yourself to ask, where is God at work in this person's life? And once you spot it, use your words to build them up.
He points out a staggering statistic.
Yeah.
The average person speaks roughly 25,000 words a day. And he grounds this in Ephesians 4.29. Let no corrupting talk come out of your mouths, but only such as is good for building up.
25,000 words is an ocean of words.
I want to ask you, the listener, to pause and evaluate your own output. Think back over the last 100 words you spoke right before you hit play on this podcast. Were they corrupting? Complaining? Or did they literally impart grace to the person who heard them?
It's deeply convicting. Now, this doesn't mean we never correct anyone. But the author tells a very vulnerable story about correcting his teenage son. He delivered the correction accurately but bluntly as he rushed out the door.
And his wife pulled him aside afterward.
Yes. She gently said, CJ, I didn't hear you say anything about the gospel in that conversation. He realized correction delivered without grace isn't constructive. It's just condemnation.
Which perfectly sets up the necessity of living a deep, accountable community. We are naturally blind to our own pride, so we need people who love us enough to correct us.
And this leads to the most vivid story in the book. The cream cheese story.
Oh, this is the best.
He describes sitting in a diner, people watching. He spots this incredibly successful-looking businessman in a tailored Armani suit, silk tie, Rolex. He looks like $1 million.
Just exuding total confidence.
Right. But as the man stands up to leave, the author notices a giant, undeniable blob of white cream cheese stuck dead center in the man's perfectly groomed mustache.
Oh, no.
And no one says a word. They just let him walk out into a high-stakes meeting looking completely ridiculous. The author uses this as a metaphor for our own spiritual blindness.
We think we have our act entirely together.
But we all have cream cheese on our face. We have glaring blind spots. He shares how he was in an accountability group, confessing a sin he thought he completely understood. He neatly packaged it and tried to move on.
He thought his face was clean. But his friends wouldn't let him off the hook. They started asking probing, uncomfortable questions.
And his immediate internal reaction was defensiveness. I'm the pastor, I know my heart better than you do. But because they loved him, they pushed through his irritation.
They were effectively saying, no, the cream cheese is still there, and we love you too much to let you walk around like that.
It's a profound argument for vulnerability.
It is absolutely vital.
Yeah.
Living your life isolated from a community that has permission to correct you is like walking out of a public restroom with a 3-foot trail of toilet paper stuck to your shoe.
Exactly.
You feel fantastic strutting down the hall, but everyone else sees the embarrassing mess. You desperately need a friend brave enough to tap you on the shoulder and say, hey, you've got paper on your shoe. It stings, but it saves you from prolonged public embarrassment.
That transition from internal community correction to dealing with external chaos brings us to the final focus of the book, the crucible of suffering and legacy.
This is where the rubber meets the road. How does humility function in the dark when your life falls apart? To answer this, he takes us into the Old Testament book of Habakkuk.
Habakkuk is brutally honest. It starts with him deeply confused, looking at the impending invasion of the ruthless Babylonian army. They're coming to destroy his nation.
And he looks at the heavens and demands answers. God, why are you silent?
He's experiencing intense cognitive dissonance. But by chapter 3, you see a totally transformed prophet. And what's critical is that his external circumstances haven't changed one bit.
The army is still coming.
Yes, destruction is unavoidable. But his heart has shifted from demanding answers to profound rejoicing. He writes, "Though the fig tree should not blossom, yet I will rejoice in the Lord."
How does a human being make that psychological leap, looking at total annihilation and deciding to take joy in God?
He realizes that his suffering, though horrific, is fundamentally temporary, but his salvation is permanent. He recognizes that in this life, no matter how bad things get, our suffering is never as great as our sins deserve. When you grasp that you've been spared eternal disaster, it moves the heart from entitled anger, "Why is this happening to me?" to tearful gratitude.
Okay, I understand the theology of that. So, what does this all mean for us today? It's easy to read Habakkuk in a comfortable room, but when a family member gets a terminal diagnosis, how do we practically bridge the gap between raw human grief and theological rejoicing? Does humility mean we can't cry?
Not at all. Jesus wept. Humility does not erase grief. And the author answers this by sharing the heartbreaking story of his own sister, Sharon, and her husband, Dave.
Right. Dave was diagnosed with a highly aggressive brain tumor.
Yeah. They did all the grueling surgeries, the chemo, but the tumor kept growing. Eventually, Dave was in a hospice bed in their living room, waiting to die.
The absolute nightmare scenario. The slow, agonizing watch.
And during this, an unbelieving relative came to visit. He saw Sharon relentlessly caring for her dying husband, and this relative was filled with visceral anger. He asked her, "Why aren't you angry at God for doing this to Dave?"
What a heavy, piercing question. How did she respond?
Out of the depths of her sorrow, she responded with the raw truth of the gospel. She said, "Dave deserved hell for his sins, just like you and me, but God forgave him. Because of that, Dave is going to heaven. How could I possibly be angry at God for taking him to heaven?"
That response is breathtaking. And her grief was immense. She cried. But her theology acted as an unbreakable steel anchor in a Category 5 hurricane. She knew his ultimate eternal problem was already solved.
You cannot manufacture that kind of response on the spot. It's the result of years of practicing those morning and evening routines.
Which leads directly into the final focus, legacy. How we parent our children. The author points out that our culture celebrates things that are fundamentally meaningless to God.
We build monuments to athletes. We idolize influencers.
We scream great when a linebacker makes a tackle. But is God in heaven marveling at a tackle? He's not. The author implemented this fantastic rule for his parenting. I don't celebrate athletic or academic achievements more than I celebrate godly character.
He's not anti-achievement. But he saves the massive break-out-the-cake celebrations for when his kids demonstrate humility, servanthood, or sacrifice.
He's training their affections to admire what God admires.
He also frames the biblical command for children to honor their parents as an opportunity to recognize true greatness in the home. The parents who sacrifice sleep and serve their families are demonstrating Christ-like servanthood. True greatness is happening in the kitchen, not on the stage.
We have covered a truly massive amount of ground today. We started with the pragmatic appeal of humility in business, contrasted it with the absurdity of pride, and explored pride as cosmic theft. We saw Jesus radically reverse the definition of greatness to servanthood, made possible by his ransom.
We walked through the daily battles, preaching the cross in the morning, rejecting cosmic plagiarism at night, and the physical vulnerability of sleep.
We explored advanced practices like studying God's attributes, playing golf, and the vital need for a community to point out the cream cheese on our faces.
And we ended in the crucible of suffering with Habakkuk and the story of Dave and Sharon, seeing how an unshakable grasp of eternal salvation sustains us through agonizing temporal losses.
We want to challenge you, the listener, to actively participate in these ideas. Don't just let the audio of this podcast wash over you. Let these specific practices enhance your life. Take action.
Preach the gospel to yourself tomorrow morning. Look for the evidences of grace in your frustrating coworker and use your words to build them up.
Absolutely. We strongly encourage you to purchase this book, Humility, True Greatness by C.J. Mahaney. Read it, highlight it, and bring it to your community. We also ask you to engage with the author on social media and keep this conversation going.
Thank you so much for joining us for this episode. If this challenged your perspective, please follow, subscribe, and share the Playing Books podcast.
As we close out, I want to leave you with one final thought. We talked about how falling asleep is a physical parable of trusting God. But what about the exact moment you wake up tomorrow? When your eyes flutter open, will it be a resurrection to a new day where you immediately try to steal the glory and contend for supremacy? Or will it be a resurrection to serve? Think deeply about exactly who you will choose to be tomorrow morning before your feet even hit the floor.